Okay then, the Charge Blade. Time and time again, when this supersized sword and shield pops up in social media conversation, you will be met with a lot of the following. Oh, Charge Blade sucks in Rise. Capcom killed the weapon. I haven't spoken to a woman in years. That last one's a bit more of a general online thing, but you get the point. People have a very low opinion of the weapon currently, but I'll tell you what, I don't really see a lot of explanation as to why. It's a lot of sweeping statements and generalizations and the same sentiment being repeated, so that's what we're going to rectify today. Hi everybody, I'm CeraCymmetry, and here's what's actually wrong with Charge Blade in Monster Hunter Rise. Before we begin, however, I do want to preface this by saying that I enjoy Charge Blade in Rise. Hell, it's one of my most used weapons on the PC version, and I've speedrun a lot of monsters with it over my time that it's been released. Despite the issues we'll be covering, when it works, it does so very well, but you really do feel like you're doing well in spite of the weapon rather than because of it. However, I would still recommend properly learning the thing. It's a very fun weapon to get your hands on, and I do hope that this can give you more of an insight as to understand why people say there are issues, rather than just your usual generic headline trying to take advantage of a popular topic. Right then, on with it. The first issue is a general one that Charge Blade has suffered with for quite some time. Charge Blade has what is known as skill tax. Now what is skill tax? I'm glad you asked, fictional commenter. You see, many weapons back in base Monster Hunter world could use very similar sets. For example, Insect Glaive, Hammer and Longsword could run the usual sets of crit eye, attack boost, weakness exploit, crit boost, all that kind of stuff with barely any difference between the two. It is in fact one of the reasons why Draken Armor from Behemoth was so centralizing when it came out. Those skills apply to pretty much everything on the spectrum. Charge Blade, on the other hand, has so many relevant skills that the cost of being able to assemble a set is far more expensive than slapping together a random set for any of the previously mentioned weapons. Not only does attack boost get a higher priority due to scaling your Phial damage, but magazine, artillery, guard, and even focus were desirable options that were all relevant to CB. Whether it was a flat-out boost to damage multipliers or getting the most out of opportunities, each of those skills were relevant to boosting your damage. Now this means sacrificing some staple skills for more contextual ones. If we fast forward to Monster Hunter Rise, with the introduction of new skills and silk binds, now a lot more weapons seem to have this issue, such as Sword and Shield running offensive guard on Metsu Shorigeki sets, Longsword getting use out of Quick Sheath 3, and of course even Rapid Morph on Switch Axe. You then couple that with the fact that some decorations like attack boost or crit eye packed on a few pounds and now take up larger slots. This makes all of these skills more expensive and something that is felt by everyone. It's part of Charge Blade of course, and definitely something that needs to be taken into allowance when you want to get to know the weapon as a whole. Now onto the second issue, and these are more specific to Monster Hunter Rise. I've seen discussed occasionally, but again, never actually properly engaged with in their entirety. What this has to do with is the variety of optimal sets and the playstyles that go with them. Put simply, there's two relevant endgame Rise sets, that's it. The first relates to the Rajang Charge Blade, the Akaji Immortal. Your typical skills that you'd expect to see on a set like this will be artillery, load shells, attack boost, offensive guard, and bludgeoner. Hunters would use the decent natural green and high roar of the weapon, combined with the percentage boost it gets from Dulling Strike to slam out the attack known as the Super Amped Elemental Discharge, or SAED. This paired really well with the new counter-peak performance Silk Bind, and it allows a free guard with no knockback essentially, can be comboed right into the main damage dealer of the set too, and is a great matchup for fights like the Zinogre and Mizutsune families. Personally, I'd especially recommend this for Magnum Marlowe. Honestly, it's a great matchup and probably the best that Charge Blade has. However, it wasn't consistent. And yep, we're going to be talking about the Phial height. To explain, when you slam out the SAED, your Phials come out in a big long line doing KO and fixed damage that scales off of artillery and raw. These Phials have a significantly reduced vertical hitbox when you compare it to Monster Hunter World, and this basically means that if you don't perfectly align yourself, these hits will go sailing underneath the monster. Even if it's a little bit off the ground. For example, something like Diablos or Rakna Kadaki, they're just going to go straight under. What makes it even worse is that if the monster is in a prime spot, the sheer power of the initial axe hit can cause a flinch, in which the animation of the monster flinching ends up causing the Phials to whiff anyways. Now, in terms of how we'd resolve this, to me it's pretty simple, just make those Phial hitboxes taller. To me, the whole thing about the SAED playstyle is about knowing whether you can commit to this huge attack that has a large windup and long recovery, and it's up to the player to manage this. In some cases you may even trade with the monster, but for hunters that can be preferable to a passive playstyle where your damage output stays low because you're hiding behind a shield. There shouldn't have to be this extra layer of RNG after you've already taken this risky move to decide if it's going to work or not, even when you've done everything perfectly. Fix that, and honestly I'd reckon there'd be a couple good more SAED matchups that spring out of the woodwork. On to the second playstyle. Now this revolves, pun absolutely intended, I'm a comedy god, around the Silkbind spinning slash. This draws the focus away from the Phials and instead focuses on consistent, smaller impact attacks. As such, skills like artillery and load shells aren't often seen, and instead players look towards critical attacks with skills like weakness exploit and crit boost being the meta. Of course, anyone with a modicum of knowledge about the game will be able to tell you that the only option for this is the Nargacuga Chargeblade, the Dark of Night. 45% base affinity, decent natural white sharpness and raw go hand in hand with just taking the Valstrax armor set, slapping crit boost and attack boost on it, and using Dragonheart to skyrocket the damage. Now my issue with this is more of a personal one. Compared with Iceborne's Savage Axe mode, the buff doesn't persist when you sheath or switch into sword mode, and this essentially locks the player out of using their shield except in emergencies. It also slows your movement options to maintain the sword blade, and it feels a bit sluggish. I will say I've gotten more familiar with it since switching to the PC version. It's very nice for Apex Zinogre and things like Nargacuga as well, but it does still feel a little bit ham-fisted. And with that, we've covered the two main styles of Chargeblade that perform well at endgame, but the issues that come with them. There is an argument to be made for Zinogre and Valstrax as weapons with the various species ramp-up buffs, and it is true that they do perform respectably, but compared to the innate KO you get with Nargacuga, they end up falling slightly short. It's this hyperfixation on two specific weapons within the entire class that lends more of a spotlight to these issues, I think. Finally, and this may be an issue with the game engine itself, but it's the inputs. This is purely anecdotal to begin with, but have you ever felt like Rise swallows the circle/A input at times? I've noticed it a lot with Gunlance, Hammer, and of course Chargeblade. It's rough coming from a roll or a sword swing and your charged sword input just disappears. I've lost more than a couple of speedruns to it. In the same vein, there's also the question of input buffering. Now by input buffering, I mean the length of time after an attack animation that you can delay the next input of the combo. It's a very important aspect of Chargeblade, as that time can mean an extra half second of a guard point being up to allow you to go into another attack, or time to adjust to an unexpected attack from the monster. In Rise, these windows are all massively shortened, and there's a lot less of a sense of fluidity about the whole thing. With less time to pull off guard points and your opening sort of finishing as the monster goes in for an attack, this can lead to a much more frustrating experience for players who find themselves unable to respond. Chargeblade's inputs in World and 4U were brilliant, and felt great. For some reason Capcom have chosen just to turn around and make the thing feel less like a ballet dancer and more like a hacker being done on a pile of bricks. Just change that back. Just give us a bit more time where we're allowed to combo from one attack to the other, and I guarantee Chargeblade will feel a lot more agreeable to deal with. And that's pretty much it. That's a summary of most of the reasons why people say Chargeblade sucks in Rise now. It's a very broad generalizing statement, and I feel like it does a lot of harm. The weapon is fun, but you do have to be realistic about the problems and understand them to see how to get around them. Now as we close out the video, I would be remiss if I didn't comment on Sunbreak. If I'm being brutally honest, I don't expect the issues to be looked at. And the way things are going from the trailers we've seen is it seems to be that we'll get one new super move or an upgrade to the existing wire moves, and no real mechanical adjustment weapon-wise, which would be a shame. There is, however, a presentation on May the 10th, 2022, so for once I would love to be wrong about something. It's bound to happen sooner or later, right? I hope you came away from this video a little bit more enlightened as to what happened with Chargeblade in Rise, and please, give the channel a sub if you want to see more stuff like this. Thanks lads, catch you next time.